Ever since I was a kid, it was crystal clear who the favorite child was in our house. My younger sister was the delicate one, the one who needed protection. Mom and Dad practically wrapped her in bubble wrap her entire life. Every problem she had was handled for her. Every stumble she made was cushioned. Me? I was the strong one, the boy who would figure it out on his own. Whenever I had struggles, I got told, "You're tough, son, you'll manage." No help, no comfort, no backup. Just the expectation that I would survive while all of their attention and energy went into my sister. At first, as a kid, I tried to convince myself that maybe that's just how families worked. But as I got older, especially in high school, the favoritism wasn't just obvious, it was crushing. By the time I hit high school, the differences in how my parents treated me versus my sister weren't just subtle, they were glaring. My sister was the type of kid who struggled with almost everything. At least that's how my parents framed it. She wasn't dumb, not at all, but she leaned hard into the helpless little girl role that my mom and dad kept pushing on her. If she failed a test, they rushed to get her a tutor. If she was upset about a friend, they comforted her with shopping trips. If she didn't feel like going to school one day, my mom would call her in sick without hesitation. Me? I was the strong one, which translated into being the ignored one. I was told constantly, "You'll be fine, son. You've got this." If I was struggling with math, they said I just had to work harder. If I came home exhausted from practice, they'd tell me I should man up and push through. While my sister was chauffeured around everywhere, I was told to get myself to practice or ask for rides from friends. And when I pointed out the unfairness of it, they'd brush me off with, "Well, your sister needs more help. You're different." That attitude extended into everything. My sister always had spending money, new clothes, electronics, whatever. I wanted a new pair of sneakers for basketball. I had to get a job and buy them myself. I started working part-time at a fast food place just to afford the extras that other kids seemed to get without even asking. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about emotional support, too. If my sister got a bad grade, they'd sit her down, talk her through it, make her feel like the world wasn't ending. If I got a bad grade, it was silence. Or worse, a lecture about how I needed to focus more and set an example. I learned quickly that no matter what, my needs would always come second to hers. And, of course, my sister noticed the difference too. She realized early on that she could get away with almost anything. If she wanted out of chores, she'd whine and pout until my parents caved. Guess who ended up doing them? Me. If she wanted something expensive, my parents would find a way to buy it, even if it strained their budget. And when I complained, she'd smirk and say, "Well, I'm the baby. They just love me more." At the time, I thought she was just joking, but the older I got, the more I realized she actually meant it. That favoritism poisoned our relationship. We weren't close like siblings should be. She didn't respect me, and I didn't trust her. To her, I was just the older brother who was too serious and always angry. To me, she was the spoiled golden child who could do no wrong. High school was the point where I started quietly resenting not just my sister, but my parents too. I still worked hard, still pushed myself, but it was obvious that no matter what I did, I was on my own. And even though it hurt, I started to accept that maybe this was just the role I was doomed to play in our family. The strong one, the one who figured it out, the one who got nothing in return. When college came around, I thought, just for a second, that maybe things would finally be different. I had worked my ass off in high school, juggling classes, sports, and a job just to prove that I could handle whatever was thrown at me. I figured when I got my acceptance letter, my parents would be proud, maybe even willing to invest in my future the way they had always invested in my sister's comfort. I was wrong. When I told them I got into a good university, they congratulated me briefly and then immediately followed it up with, "Well, you've always been independent. You'll figure out how to pay for it." That was it. No discussion of financial support. No talk of loans they could co-sign. Nothing. Just a pat on the back and a reminder that I was on my own. Meanwhile, my sister, who was a couple of years behind me, was already getting the "don't worry, sweetheart, we'll help you with everything" treatment. My parents promised her they'd cover her rent, help with tuition, and make sure she didn't have to stress while she studied. Watching that unfold while I was drowning in tuition bills and working 2 part-time jobs to keep myself afloat, yeah, it burned. College was brutal. I worked nights and weekends at a warehouse while taking a full course load. I slept maybe 4 or 5 hours a night, lived on instant noodles, and counted every dollar. There were times when I wondered if I'd even make it through. My parents rarely checked in, not about my mental health, not about my grades, not about anything. The only time they really called was when they wanted to update me on my sister's achievements, which usually amounted to stuff like her joining a club or getting good grades with the help of the tutors they paid for. Still, I pushed through. Somehow, I graduated. And unlike my sister, I had actual work experience from all those grueling jobs I took to survive. That made me stand out. I landed a solid job right out of school, and for the first time, I started to breathe easier. Money wasn't pouring in yet, but it was enough that I wasn't terrified of every bill. And soon after, my career began to take off faster than I expected. Promotions came, raises followed, and before long, I was in a very comfortable financial position. And of course, that's when my parents started calling again. But this time, not to talk about my sister's accomplishments. This time, they wanted something from me. At first, the requests didn't feel too suspicious. My parents framed them as small favors, things any good son would do. It started with a phone call from my mom one evening. She sounded stressed and told me they were a little behind on the utility bill. I had the money, so I sent it over without hesitation. Honestly, it felt good at the time. For once, I was in a position where I could actually help, and a part of me thought, maybe now they'll finally appreciate me. But it didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Dad called saying the car needed urgent repairs. "We don't want to burden your sister with this," he said. "She has enough on her plate." That line stuck with me, because she was in college too, but unlike me, she wasn't working 20 hours a week to keep her head above water. She was fully supported. Still, I didn't question it. I wired him the money. After that, the requests became routine. There was always something. Mortgage payments, unexpected medical bills, household expenses, even emergency groceries. They always made it sound like they were barely scraping by. And I, being the dutiful son who wanted to believe that maybe I could finally earn their love or respect, kept helping. At first, I didn't think twice. I told myself, this is what families do. But the amounts started adding up, thousands over the course of months. Whenever I hinted at saying no, they'd guilt-trip me. "We don't want to ask, but you know we're struggling." And every time, my mom would slip in something like, "Your sister is trying so hard, she shouldn't have to stress about money." That sentence would make my blood boil a little, but I swallowed it. I told myself they just needed help getting back on their feet. But deep down, a little voice in my head kept whispering that something didn't add up. I was making good money, but it felt like no matter how much I sent, it was never enough. And each time I transferred money, I noticed my parents didn't really sound grateful. They sounded expectant, like I owed it to them. Still, at this stage, I was naive. I thought I was being the bigger person, doing my part as the strong child. I had no idea that the truth behind their constant struggles was far uglier than I ever imagined. The truth came out in the ugliest, most accidental way possible. One weekend, I drove home to visit. I hadn't been back much because work kept me busy, but I thought maybe I could surprise my parents and spend some quality time. When I walked in, my sister was there too, lounging on the couch with a brand new designer handbag casually tossed at her feet. The kind of bag that costs more than a month's worth of rent when I was in college. At first, I thought maybe she'd bought it herself. But then I overheard her bragging to a friend on the phone about how mom and dad got it for me because I've been so stressed lately. Something in me snapped. That same week, my mom had called me crying about how they couldn't afford groceries and needed just a little extra to make it through the month. And yet here was my sister, holding a handbag worth hundreds, maybe thousands, of dollars, gifted to her as some kind of therapy present. I confronted my parents right then and there. They fumbled with excuses. "She's been having a hard time. You don't understand. She needs encouragement. It was just a one-time thing." But I wasn't stupid. I asked straight up, "Was all the money I've been sending actually going to bills, or were you funneling it into her gifts?" Their silence was my answer. My dad avoided eye contact. My mom tried to guilt-trip me, saying, "We just don't want her to feel like a failure. She's fragile. You're strong. You can handle more." That line, the same damn excuse I'd heard my entire life, hit me like a brick. Here I was, killing myself in college just to stay afloat, grinding my way into a career, sending them thousands of dollars because I thought they were barely surviving, only to learn they were using me to bankroll my sister's lifestyle. I felt white-hot anger boiling inside me. But underneath that was something colder, sharper. I realized I wasn't just angry, I was done. For years, they'd treated me like the son who didn't need support, and now that I was successful, they saw me as a bottomless wallet. And my sister? She didn't even look guilty. She just smirked, like this was all perfectly normal. That was the moment my mindset shifted. I wasn't going to keep being the family ATM. If they saw me as the strong one who could handle anything, then they were about to learn what that really meant. I decided then and there. I was going to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. That night after I drove home, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything. The handbag at my sister's feet, the excuses my parents stammered out, the smug look on her face when I confronted them. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was years of being dismissed, ignored, and told I didn't need support, culminating in the realization that they weren't just neglecting me anymore, they were using me. At first, I felt pure rage. I wanted to cut them off completely, block their numbers, never speak to them again. And honestly, that would have been the easiest thing to do. But as the hours passed, my anger sharpened into something colder. I didn't just want to walk away, I wanted them to understand what they had done. I wanted them to feel, for once, what it was like to be left behind, unsupported, while someone else got all the help. I thought back to my childhood, all the times I'd gone without because they were too busy cushioning my sister. The late nights in college where I worked double shifts while my sister went shopping with the allowance they gave her. The holidays where she got expensive gifts and I got practical, strong son presents like socks or tools. I realized something. They had built this entire dynamic by constantly reinforcing the idea that I didn't need help. Fine, I'd use that against them. So I decided to stop being their safety net. No more easy money transfers. No more instant rescues. I would give them exactly what they gave me growing up, tough love and silence. But that wasn't enough. I also wanted them to see where their money was going, to force them to face the truth that they had been living in denial about. I started planning. The next time they called me asking for money, I wasn't going to refuse outright. Instead, I'd play along, at least for a little while. I wanted to set the stage for a confrontation that they couldn't wriggle out of. A conversation where every excuse, every manipulation would fall apart in front of them. And my sister? She was going to be part of it too. I wasn't just angry at my parents anymore. She'd been complicit in this dynamic, milking it for everything she could, never once showing an ounce of gratitude or shame. If she thought she could keep using everyone around her to prop up her life while having fun to the fullest, then it was time for reality to hit her square in the face. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. My family had built this lopsided world where I was the workhorse and my sister was the princess. But I wasn't going to play my role anymore. It was time for the script to change. When my parents called me again the following week, I already knew what my answer would be. My mom opened the conversation with her usual teary voice about how things were so tight this month. Dad jumped in with his gruff tone, saying it was just a small favor. Son, you can afford it. And as always, they ended with the line that made my blood pressure spike. We don't want to bother your sister. She's under enough stress already. In the past, I would have sighed, rolled my eyes, and transferred the money just to make it stop. But this time I smiled, even though they couldn't see it. Of course, Mom. Of course, Dad. I'll help. And I did. I sent the money, just like before. But this time I kept meticulous notes. Every dollar, every reason they gave, every promise that it was just this once. I didn't want this to be a vague emotional confrontation. I wanted receipts, literally and figuratively. Over the next 2 months, I let them keep digging. More unexpected bills, more emergencies. I kept transferring money, but each time, I made sure to casually ask little questions. So what exactly was this bill for? Or didn't you just fix the car last month? Their answers got sloppier, and my suspicion grew stronger. I knew where the money was really going, but I wanted them to say it out loud. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on my sister. Social media made it easy. While my parents were supposedly barely making ends meet, my sister was posting pictures of nights out, new clothes, a weekend trip with friends. The nail in the coffin was when she showed off a brand new phone, the latest model. I hadn't even upgraded mine yet because I didn't see the point. But there she was, flaunting it, captioning it, "Thanks Mom and Dad, love." That's when I knew my plan was working. They were still bleeding money. They didn't have to keep her comfortable, and I was the one footing the bill. They thought they were playing me, but really, I was letting them build the case against themselves. My goal wasn't just to cut them off. That would have been too easy. I wanted them to face me, face the truth, and have no way to deny it. I wanted my sister sitting at the table when I laid out every transfer, every excuse, every luxury item she'd been handed while they cried poverty to me. So I set the trap. I told them I'd help again, but only if we all sat down, together, and went through their finances like adults. I offered to help them budget. I framed it as caring, as me wanting to make sure they didn't struggle anymore. They ate it up, thanking me like I was some kind of hero. Little did they know, I wasn't coming to save them. I was coming to expose them. When the day came for the budget meeting, I drove to my parents' house with my laptop, spreadsheets, and every single bank transfer record I'd kept. My heart was pounding the whole drive, not from nerves, but from a strange mix of anticipation and anger that had been simmering for months. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about every moment of my life where I had been told I didn't need help, only to be treated as nothing more than a lifeline when it was convenient for them. When I arrived, Mom was already bustling around like it was a holiday. She had snacks laid out, and she hugged me like I was the savior of the family. Dad gave me one of his manly pats on the back, like we were about to talk business. My sister? She was on the couch scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me except for a half smirk. She probably thought this whole thing was just another moment where I'd swoop in and bail everyone out. I sat everyone down at the dining room table. I opened my laptop and said, "All right, let's go through your finances. If I'm going to keep helping, we need to figure out where the money's going." The room shifted. My mom immediately got defensive, saying, "Honey, we don't need to get into all that detail. We just need a little help like always." My dad grumbled, "We don't need spreadsheets, son. Just tell us what you can send." My sister rolled her eyes and muttered, "This is so dramatic." But I didn't budge. I smiled and said, "No, if we're going to be responsible, we need to do this properly." I pulled up the records of every transfer I had made over the past year. "Here's the money I've sent you," I said, pointing at the totals. The numbers were staggering, even to me. Tens of thousands gone, just like that. Then I pulled up my sister's Instagram page on the projector screen I had connected. Her trips, her bags, her phone. Post after post of her flaunting the very things my parents claimed they couldn't afford. "And here's where a lot of it went," I said flatly. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mom's face went pale, my dad looked away, and my sister froze with her mouth half open, like she couldn't believe I'd just aired everything out like that. This was it. The stage was set. Now it was time to hear their excuses. For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence hang in the room like a heavy curtain. My parents' usual defenses were crumbling under the weight of the numbers, and my sister was visibly panicking, like she hadn't expected her little golden world to be exposed. I started with my parents. "Do you see this?" I asked, pointing at the spreadsheet. "This is every dollar I've sent over the past year. Tens of thousands. Every time you called, every emergency, every we can't make it this month, it's all here. And yet, somehow, you managed to buy her this." I gestured to the images of her expensive bags, trips, and gadgets projected on the screen. Mom's face twisted into the familiar mix of guilt and defensiveness. "We just wanted her to feel loved," she whispered, almost pleading. "She's been struggling, and we didn't want her to feel left out." I cut her off. "And what about me? Did I not struggle? Did I not work my ass off through high school and college without a safety net? Did I not sacrifice sleep, social life, and even basic comfort because you refused to help me?" My voice cracked a little, not from weakness, but from years of pent-up frustration. Dad tried to intervene with a gruff, "Son, we didn't mean," but I held up my hand. "No, just listen." Then I turned to my sister. "And you knew. You knew everything, didn't you? Every time I sent money, every time they cried to me about struggling, you were living it up. You were enjoying nights out, expensive clothes, and new phones while pretending life was hard." Her defense was almost comical, if it weren't so infuriating. I just they give me gifts. They love me. You're just jealous because you have to work for your money." "Jealous?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Jealous? Do you know how much I worked to get where I am? I didn't get handouts or therapy gifts. I earned everything. And you, just accepted every advantage and then had the nerve to act like it was all fair. The room went silent again, heavier than before. Mom was staring at the floor. Dad looked like he'd been punched. And my sister, she finally looked small. Not the smug, untouchable little girl I'd grown up with, but a person caught in her own selfishness. For the first time, I felt like the balance had shifted. The dynamic that had haunted me for years, the favoritism, the neglect, the manipulation, was now fully visible to everyone. And I realized something important. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them to see. After the confrontation, the house was heavy with silence. The kind of silence that feels like it could crush you if you move too quickly. My parents didn't know where to look. Mom kept glancing at the floor, twisting her hands, clearly struggling with guilt and shame she hadn't faced in decades. Dad just sat back, arms crossed, muttering under his breath, trying to salvage whatever dignity he could, but the truth hung over him like a storm cloud. And my sister, she was a different story. She slumped on the couch, scrolling through her phone again, but this time there was no smirk. She looked smaller, like she'd finally realized that someone had seen through her act. Her excuses, her casual, entitled attitude, hadn't worked. She had been caught red-handed, enjoying a life funded by my hard work and the naivety of my parents. I could see the confusion and fear flash across her face, a fleeting moment before she masked it with defensiveness. She stammered, unable to finish her sentence. Stop, I said firmly. No more excuses. You've had everything handed to you, and now you know what it looks like when the truth comes out. I've supported you. I've supported them, and I'm done. It's time for all of you to face reality. For me, though, the emotions were complex. Part of me felt relief, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had finally been lifted. Part of me still felt hurt, decades of neglect and favoritism surfacing all at once. I realized just how lonely it had been, growing up constantly compared to a sibling who got everything handed to her. But the anger that had once burned so brightly had started to cool into a sense of clarity. Seeing their reactions was almost satisfying, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because for once, the truth couldn't be denied. Mom's guilt was palpable, Dad's pride was bruised, and my sister's confidence had finally cracked. They were forced to see the consequences of their choices. For the first time, I felt like I had power, not over them in a cruel sense, but over the situation. I wasn't going to be used. I wasn't going to prop up a lifestyle that wasn't mine to maintain. The emotional weight of years of favoritism and neglect started to lift, replaced with a strange sense of freedom. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. There would be resentment, arguments, and likely ongoing tension. But in that moment, I finally felt like I had claimed some form of justice. Not vengeance, but accountability. After the confrontation, I spent the night thinking about what came next. I knew I couldn't just go back to the way things were. The dynamic that had defined my entire life, being this strong one who always figured it out, while my sister got everything handed to her, was deeply ingrained, and my parents weren't going to change overnight. My sister certainly wasn't. So I made a decision. I would no longer act as their financial safety net. I would no longer cover bills, emergencies, or gifts for my sister. But this wasn't just about cutting them off. It was about teaching a lesson they couldn't ignore. They had been using me for years, justifying their favoritism and indulgence, and I was done enabling it. The next step was careful planning. I created a detailed budget spreadsheet showing exactly what my parents' real expenses were versus what they were spending on gifts and luxuries for my sister. I even included screenshots of my sister's posts, her shopping sprees, and trips she had taken while claiming to struggle financially. Everything was documented. No ambiguity, no excuses. I decided to give them one last chance to take responsibility. I would help cover actual bills for 1 month, but only if they promised to stick to essentials and treat my sister like an adult who had to handle her own life. No more coddling, no more gifts, no more pretending. This was about accountability, not punishment. At the same time, I had a private conversation with my sister. I told her bluntly, "You can't keep living this way. You're old enough to handle your own problems. I've been supporting you, but I'm done. If you can't manage your life without gifts and bailouts, that's your problem, not mine." She tried to argue, tried to claim that I didn't understand her stress, but I held firm. I wasn't going to be manipulated, guilt-tripped, or laughed at anymore. That night, I felt a mix of fear and liberation. I knew this would be messy. My parents would be angry, my sister would resent me, and our relationship would never be the same. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was taking control of the narrative, like I was no longer just the strong one in name, but actually in reality. The next morning, I implemented the plan. I sent the last emergency payment, but it came with conditions. Only essential bills, no luxuries. And then I stopped. I didn't respond to petty complaints, excuses, or guilt trips. I let the consequences play out naturally. The first week after I stopped sending money was chaotic, to say the least. My parents called constantly, sometimes together, sometimes separately, each time with a new emergency that demanded attention. Bills were allegedly overdue, appliances broke down, and of course, there was always the line about my sister being under stress. But this time, I didn't give in. I listened politely, acknowledged their concerns, but refused to transfer a single dollar beyond what I had already committed for essentials. The difference was stark. My parents' tone shifted from calm, pleading to desperation. They tried to guilt me, saying things like, "You're our son, don't you care?" Or, "We're struggling. Can't you just help a little more?" I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I simply reminded them of the rules we had agreed on. Essentials only, and my sister needed to take responsibility for herself. And my sister? She freaked out. Suddenly, the life she'd been living, a life where every whim was indulged, was no longer guaranteed. She started calling me directly, whining about bills, rent, and trips she needed to survive. When I calmly told her that she was old enough to handle her own finances and that I wasn't giving her gifts anymore, her attitude shifted. First shock, then anger, and finally, a grudging, hesitant compliance. She had to start doing things on her own, facing rejection for the first time in her life. The weeks stretched into 2, then 3. My parents were forced to reevaluate their spending. Luxury gifts stopped, expensive outings were canceled. Suddenly, the reality of what they had been doing hit them. They had been living beyond their means, expecting me to fill the gap, while letting my sister live like a princess. I could see the stress on their faces, the tension in their voices. For the first time, they were experiencing the consequences of their favoritism. Meanwhile, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. No more pretending, no more being the family ATM. I could finally focus on my life, my career, and my own financial stability without the constant drain of supporting a lifestyle that wasn't mine. I wasn't happy that my family was struggling, but I was content knowing they were finally facing the reality I had lived with for years. By the end of the month, things had shifted significantly. My sister had started paying her own bills, even if grudgingly. My parents were calmer, if embarrassed and resentful, forced to confront their own decisions. And I was free, mentally, financially, and emotionally, for the first time in my life. After a few months, the house had changed, quietly but noticeably. The constant stream of calls and emergencies had slowed, because my parents had finally realized that I wasn't going to bail them out anymore. The entitlement that had ruled my sister's life was finally meeting reality. For the first time, she had to plan, budget, and face consequences when she failed. The posts on social media became less flashy, the trips fewer and farther apart, and the expensive gifts all but stopped. My parents, for their part, had started adjusting. There were awkward conversations about bills, about priorities, and yes, about mistakes they had made in raising us. I didn't sit there lecturing them endlessly, but I made sure they understood that I would no longer be the automatic safety net. They couldn't gaslight me anymore. They had seen the receipts, the evidence, and my unwavering stance. Pride mixed with guilt colored every interaction. They were embarrassed, defensive at times, but slowly they began to accept that their previous approach had consequences. And my sister, seeing her cope with real-life responsibilities was almost surreal. The first month was rough. Arguments, missed deadlines, panicked calls to my parents for help that they now refused to provide. But gradually, she started to manage. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but with effort. She still tried the occasional guilt trip on me, but I had learned how to shut it down calmly, without rage. I watched as she, for the first time, realized that she couldn't simply coast through life on other people's work and generosity. For me, the relief was enormous. I could focus on my career without the guilt and constant financial strain hanging over my head. I started saving aggressively, planning my future, and feeling a sense of independence that I had never truly known before. The emotional weight of decades of favoritism and neglect had finally lifted, leaving space for something healthier: boundaries, self-respect, and clarity. It wasn't perfect. The relationships with my family remained strained. There was tension, resentment, and occasional conflict. But for the first time, those relationships were grounded in honesty and accountability, not manipulation and entitlement. I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop enabling them. By taking control, I not only protected myself, but forced my family to confront their choices. And in the process, my sister started growing up in ways she hadn't before. Sitting back and looking at everything that had happened, I realized how much this experience had shaped me. Growing up as the strong child had forced me to be independent, to figure things out on my own, and to develop resilience. At the time, it felt unfair and isolating, but now I could see that it had prepared me to handle life's challenges in a way my sister hadn't needed to. The favoritism, the neglect, the constant comparisons, they had left scars. I felt the sting of being overlooked and underappreciated for decades, and yet, I had turned that into fuel. I worked hard. I built a career. I created financial stability, and most importantly, I learned to recognize my own worth. I wasn't just strong. I was capable of standing up for myself in a way I never could have as a teenager. I also learned that boundaries are essential. My parents' manipulation and my sister's entitlement had thrived because I hadn't set limits. Once I did, the family dynamic shifted. I discovered that helping someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being, and that accountability is sometimes the harshest, but most effective, form of care. Watching my sister struggle for the first time without the constant cushion of parental and sibling support was difficult, but necessary. She had to face reality and learn responsibility, and seeing her start to adapt, even in small steps, gave me a sense of closure. I understood that I couldn't protect her from every consequence without losing myself in the process. Emotionally, I felt liberated. The resentment I had carried for years began to fade, replaced by clarity. I forgave myself for feeling hurt and angry. I didn't need my parents' approval to validate my worth, nor did I need to fund a lifestyle that wasn't mine to maintain. I had learned to prioritize myself without guilt, and that became the most valuable lesson of all. In the end, I realized that life doesn't always hand out fairness, but it does give you a chance to take control. I had taken mine, not in anger, not in cruelty, but in a way that taught my family accountability and preserved my dignity. Months have passed since I put my plan into action, and life has settled into a new, healthier rhythm. My parents no longer rely on me as a financial crutch, and they've had to face the reality of budgeting responsibly. My sister, though still learning, has started taking responsibility for her own life, paying bills, managing her job, and understanding that the world doesn't hand out free luxuries. For me, the change has been liberating. I focus on my career, my savings, and building a life that isn't dictated by guilt or manipulation. The resentment I carried for years has faded, replaced by clarity and self-respect. I finally understand the value of boundaries and accountability, and I refuse to compromise those again. Relationships with my family remain complicated. There's tension, awkwardness, and occasional friction, but it's grounded in honesty rather than favoritism and lies. I've learned that protecting yourself sometimes means tough love, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Looking forward, my plan is simple: continue building my future, maintain boundaries, and allow my sister to grow through her own experiences. I've learned that you can't force people to change, but you can stop enabling harmful patterns. And in doing so, you reclaim your own life. I'm stronger now, wiser, and free from the weight of years of imbalance. And for the first time, I feel like I truly belong in my own life, not just as the strong one everyone relied on, but as me.